the Florida Writer Podcast, a discussion about writing and other things.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast. I'm your host, Alison Nissen, and today I am lucky enough to have with me Dr. Pamela Grey. Pamela, could you give us a 60-second elevator pitch about who you are and what you write?
Yes, well, my name is Pamela Grey. I'm a Jacksonville business owner. I work in the financial field, and but I love nonfiction, and so I've written a workbook about how to make better decisions in life. I did not write about finance. I wrote about career, health, love, relationships, touch upon wealth, and I enjoy helping people reach their goals. I'm a former academic. I was a college administrator and faculty member in my first career. So helping people achieve and reach goals that are lifelong goals has always been important to me. So this was a step to put my own philosophy and in how to make better decisions into a teaching tool that anyone can learn how to improve their decision-making skills.
What was the motivation to start your writing career?
Well, I've written academic papers. I've published in more academic books. So writing has always been important to me professionally, but this was written out of love and inspiration to fulfill a personal goal I had to give people a tool set wherever they are in the world. I've written it to be portable and mobile because our society is very mobile. And just like you and I are doing a Zoom session today, you're in another state, I'm here in Florida. My book can go anywhere, any place, and a person can do a deep dive into a self-improvement plan. My inspiration, really, Alison, came when I was changing careers. And I decided I didn't want to pursue and move on to be a college president, which was my goal. And when I changed careers, I gave myself some time out. And one of my former presidents I worked for gave me a book called The Power of Decision. It was written in 1968 by Dr. Raymond Charles Barker. And he sent it to me and he said, Pamela, this will change your life. And it will also help you laser focus on what your new career would be. On good faith, I read the book. Within a few months after reading it, I was called to really go into financial services, something I had no skill in, something I had no knowledge of, and something I had never done. So I went from being an academic with highly credentialed to a person with absolutely starting over. And I just put every bit of Dr. Barker's tool set to work in a new career. And it's been the most fabulous career I could ever have imagined. And now I try and teach other people what I learned and be able to do it so they can make life decisions too that can be meaningful and a very positive change for them.
So you're talking about a workbook, and the workbook, I imagine, is organized in chapters and has sections for introspection and deeper thought.
That's exactly right. One of the things you might wonder, why would I write a workbook for a book that had already been published? And what happened essentially, Alison, is I have never made a major life decision without reading Dr. Barker's The Power of Decision. It's such a good book. And it really keeps clarifying every time I read it what I maybe did not see about myself before. And about 4 years ago, I attended a class, someone was teaching it. And I said, oh, wow, I'm going to travel and go see this class. When I attended, I saw 25 wonderful adults struggling with the material because it was, in my estimation, being a former academic, I thought it was kind of poorly taught. And it the next day I was in my third or fourth class, and I said, and I was getting ready for work, and I was thinking, I'm not going to go back to this class. It's so poorly done. And wow, if I were teaching it, I would do it so differently. And all of a sudden I looked in the mirror and I said, well, Pamela, if you're that unhappy, why don't you do something about it? And I knew in that instant I would write the workbook that would teach other people never to have to be dependent on someone else's interpretation, but they could get the richness of the material faster, quicker, if they had a planned outline. And when I said I was a former academic, well, I was trained in instructional design. And so I had the skill set, I had the artistry, I had the writing skills. I just had to sit down and say, now, how would I take a fabulous book, 50, it was almost 50 years old, very dated language. Dr. Barker has passed away. He's not here to tell the story. And the concepts can be challenging. So I went to the owner of the copyright, who owns that today, and explained my vision for writing a workbook. And I had such a fabulous reception because I said, I want to tell this story to the world and give people a better set of tools. It took me 3 years to write that book, day and night, weekends, just every little scrap of time I had, and organized it in a thoughtful way, just like you said, chapter by chapter. So it follows what I call the host book. But my workbook, you start with first. You don't go read the host book, you start with my workbook, and then it will say, now go read chapter 1 in The Power of Decision and come back. And here are the exercises to help you work through the nuances of the vocabulary, help you better understand the concepts, but more importantly, help you reflect on yourself so that you can clarify what is really getting in the way of you succeeding with making a better decision. And at the heart of it, Dr. Barker's book is how to recognize inferior thoughts that you carry around from growing up, the way you're socialized, perhaps the way you're educated, who you surround yourself with, but also there's a lot of misconceptions people walk around with, and those interfere with them making better decisions. So it's a helpful tool to help you distill, well, where did I first arrive at that thought? How did that get stuck in my mind, and how can I now get rid of it and move forward with a more productive, useful thought? And that's really what the workbook does, is take you from point A all the way to point Z to help you thoroughly assess those inferior thoughts, but more importantly, how to construct a framework for living using a more successful pattern and tool set.
I am fascinated by your story, but I want to ask the important question. You're taking someone else's audience and you're using that audience to launch your own audience, so to speak. So you're reaching out to them. How did you get started with connecting to that audience already? Or did you go out with the idea of creating your own audience to bring them both your workbook and the book that you fell in love with?
Yeah, that's a great question. Back in 1989, I had some wonderful friends from around the country in different locations. Interesting enough, they didn't know one another. I was the central connection. And about the same time frame, they sent me a magazine and sent me multiple copies of different editions and said, you know, Pamela, I've known you for years. I think you would like this magazine. And so I opened it up and I started reading from end to end. And I read 4 editions back to back. I spent all day and most of the night reading it. And I realized I was a different person at the end of that day. It was so profound to me. The magazine has been in available to the world for since I think the 20s. I mean, it's been around a long time. It's called the Science of Mind. It's really a philosophy for living. It takes psychology, philosophy, theology, and just practical good sense and combines it into more of a philosophy for living. And I realized at that time, I did not really have a spiritual center I was going to. I had in my life, I had a really good grounding and in traditional, pretty traditional religious thinking, but as an adult, I had really not connected with a spiritual community in years. And when I read this, I said, I'm home. This is how I've always felt. I didn't realize someone had put it in writing and actually coordinated it in a way that people all around the world were actually living with this awareness. And that's when I started going to a local religious science church. And I found a great minister, very good teacher, and she started teaching me these principles and concepts. Today, those centers, which are now throughout the United States, Canada, South America, Europe, they're really worldwide. They're called Centers for Spiritual Living. And the beauty of it is nobody really comes from no one really grows up in those centers. If you're an adult my age, you came from another philosophy. So now all of us come from all these different faiths, but we're all looking for common satisfaction to improve our lives, have some understanding about our relationship to a universal presence. Some call God, some call spirit, some call Mother Nature, whatever it may be, but there's a belonging, a sense of belonging and unity. And I later went on in my career and actually worked for this organization, had no idea I would ever have that opportunity, and worked all over the United States, teaching a master's in consciousness studies, facilitating it, really not teaching it, but facilitating it for ministers all over the world. And I had that privilege of being one of those facilitators of a curriculum in consciousness studies. So here I was facilitating it, trying to live it, and later would be given a book called The Power of Decision, written by a minister, Dr. Raymond Charles Barker, out of New York City, very famous. He was very well known all over the world. A major speaker in secular settings as well as religious settings. And so because he was in such high demand and he had honed in on why decisions are poorly made and why people were failing. And people in business and industry came to him and said, oh, thank you for talking about it. Now we would like you to give us your book. And he said, well, I have no book on decision making. And they said, would you please write one? And he did. And so it's very universal. It's 52 years now in continuous publication all over the world. And but because it's dated, it uses older language. The concepts, if you're not from a center for spiritual living, if maybe you're coming out of a more traditional church, these concepts and vocabulary will not be known to you. And Dr. Barker taught them, but not in his book. He wrote it as though, well, you should know these words, you should know these ideas, you should know what I'm talking about. And to me, being an academic and educator, I said, you know, gosh, if I could just sit down, you know, if Alison was interested and I could sit down, I would explain this to you. But you see, I can't be in all places for all people. And I said, okay, I have the academic skills to write. I know how to write curriculum for adults. I've walked this material since 1989, and here it was 2016. I've been living it my whole adult life. And I said, I know the audiences, I know the ministers, I know the philosophy. I'll take my personal expertise, my professional expertise, apply my personal lens to it, but also I'm going to vet it with very well-respected theologians in the field. And that I did that. My goal, Alison, was not to interpret Dr. Barker, but to honor him, not to rewrite his material, but showcase it. And then tease out practical exercises to help people take the material and reason it through in a more modern, contemporary set of issues and problems. And that's why it took me 3 years, because I didn't rely just on myself. I did a whole vocabulary section, and I carefully, painfully wanted to be true to the science of mind, which was developed by Dr. Ernest Holmes back at the turn of the century. I wanted to be true to the wonderful people who, like the Fillmore family that created the Unity Centers out of Kansas City, and that have centers all over the world. I wanted to be thorough, because that's the researcher in me, that's the academic, but I wanted to give people hope. Because without hope, you're never going to be motivated to improve your life. You have to have it. And
Wow.
I have had great mentors who've given me hope. So I knew that it's important to convey hope to the world, especially in a time where it's so combative with economic, social, political issues. People want better for themselves, their children, their parents, their spouses. And in the midst of all of this, you could take my self-study in the privacy of your home, or start a small study group and work through it. I don't even have to be there. My hands are off the handlebars, and you can have a successful self-study that could be life-changing.
Wow, Pamela, how can people get the book, the workbook? How can they contact you? I understand you have a newsletter that goes out along with it. How can they subscribe?
Sure, great question. So as a writer, I was faced with how to publish my passion. And I ultimately chose to self-publish my workbook. It would give me more artistic control. It gave me just a lot more control over my content. And as a result, I created a website where anyone in the world can go and buy my book, and also buy Dr. Barker's book. It's a book set. If you already have Dr. Barker's book, The Power of Decision, just buy my workbook. So my website is www.poweryourdecisions.com, and that's plural, decisions.com. So poweryourdecisions.com. You can go there. I've got resources on there. I've got examples of my newsletter. I've got blogs, but you can go and purchase my book right on the site and have it shipped right to your personal, residence or business.
Dr. Pamela Grey, are you ready to switch to our rapid fire questions?
I'm ready. I'm as ready as I'll ever be.
I don't think these are going to be tough decisions for you, but maybe I'll challenge you.
Okay.
What is your most prized possession?
That's a great question. I have a small clay statue of a bust of an older woman. She looks like she came out of the fields of a farm. She has a bandana on. Her skin is very weathered. Her hands are very gnarled. And it's out of red clay by a wonderful sculptor. And the reason I love it so, and I've always kept it in my office, is it reminded me of my first employer. She was 82. She was from Torino, Italy. She ran a farm, and she hired me when I was 13. and taught me how to farm. And the reason why that statuette is so important is she taught me how to be a better person. She taught me when you start a job, you finish a job. She taught me if the going gets tough, you keep going because you're there to fulfill an important role. And in this case, if you're in farming, you're feeding people. And that was very important. So it's prized because I never want to get away from those roots. And she passed away close to 100. She worked out in the fields at 82 with me. Now, 82, and she was still working in the fields. So she also taught me that if you do what you're passionate about, you'll always, throughout life, be engaged and fulfilling important and needed roles in people's lives.
Wow, what a special memory. What is your favorite smell?
Lemon.
Ah, lemons.
Lemons or limes.
I have a lime tree and I got my first lime this year. It smells so good. I'm so excited, but my dog does not like that smell. She goes, "Arr," and she makes this like wrinkled face and runs away. It is really funny.
There's citrus is just, it's like the essence of life.
All right. Finally, what one celebrity would you love to meet?
Living or dead?
Doesn't matter.
My favorite celebrity was Greer Garson back in the 40s and 50s. I thought she was very statuesque. She was a serious actress. She could be funny as all get out. She could be the most serious person. She was beautiful and lovely and always poised. And I think if I could have ever had the opportunity to be in her presence, I think it would have been pretty special.
Sounds like that would have been something very special for you. Dr. Pamela Grey, thank you so much for coming to our show.
Oh, my pleasure. It's an honor, Alison, to be a part of your program. And again, I just encourage people, if they want to have better ideas for better decisions, consider looking at my website and subscribing to my newsletter, which, by the way, goes by the same title, Better Ideas for Better Decisions. It's free, and I think will encourage people to focus on their heart's desires and live a better quality of life.
It is a beautiful website. Thank you, everyone, for listening to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast. Alison out. Dr. Pamela Grey is the author of Power Your Decisions, Self-Study Workbook. She's also a speaker, educator, and philanthropist. Dr. Grey established the Advancing Mind Foundation in 2015, which promotes universal truths and principles as taught by the greats of the New Thought movement. For more information about Dr. Grey and her book, Power Your Decisions, visit her on her website at poweryourdecisions.com. For more information about the Florida Writers Association, visit us on the web at floridawriters.net.